it's very important for me to prove that a man of a certain age can still function after 9 o'clock, 9 p.m. Very important. Very important. Thank you, Margaret, for putting the weight and wisdom of Proskauer behind me as my pro bono counsel for the New York Center for Juvenile Justice. And thank you, Governor, for those kind words. You made it possible, Governor, for me to keep a promise to a young boy who made a terrible mistake when he was 15 years of age. But together, we were able to rectify that. I'm not going to mention the young boy, but I know that Liz Oyang is here, and she knows who he is. And you pardoned him after he led a life of redemption. And I won't forget that. Because the pardon was the only way he could avoid mandatory deportation to China for a crime he committed when he was 14 years of age, and when I had to sentence him as a felon for that crime. And that's what we tried to do in the youth part. And Governor, I have to say this to you, that your insight, your foresight, your humor, your tenderness gives you the clarity of a prophet. Thank you, my friends. I appreciate it. You know, I want to thank all of you who came out tonight despite the poor air climate. But I understand someone just mentioned to me that we were in this gigantic cave, so we're okay, because the air is all up, whatever the bad air, it's up there, it's not down here. But you know, I want to just give you a little bit, you know, I have this here, and it's like my security blanket. There was a time when I could walk up here without a piece of paper. And, you know, there was a lawyer that I know since we were both just early graduates of law school. And he knew all of my picadillos and all of my predispositions. And we know each other as novice lawyers. He as a young legal aid attorney, and I was a young prosecutor. We tried our very first jury trial against each other. But it was so long ago, speaking of why I need these, it was so long ago, we both remember winning. Now, if you're a trial lawyer, you know what that means. So one day, this lawyer comes into my courtroom, and he's representing a young juvenile offender. And he knows me, and he's a great lawyer. I love him, he's really terrific. But he knows what I like and how I deal. So he comes in and he says, "Judge, I want you to know, my client is reading, and he knows that I encourage young people to read." I said, "Well, that's good." He said, "Yes, and he's reading Dickens, and he knows that Dickens is one of my favorite authors." So I turned to this young boy. I said, "Dickens." I said, "What are you reading?" He said, "A Tale of Two Cities." I said, "A Tale of Two Cities? That's terrific. What did you think of?" It was the best of times, and it was the worst of times. And he looked at me quizzically. I said, "It's in the book." He said, "I didn't get that far." Now, true story. And I said to the lawyer, "Come up here." I said, "Come up here." I didn't blame him. I knew what he was trying to do. I didn't blame him. True story. But that's, but what is A Tale of Two Cities? What is it? It's a story of second chances. It's a story of redemption. It's the story of characters recovering and challenging and rising from their mistakes. And that's what we try to do in the youth part. And here is my youth part family, by the way. Now, I can't introduce everybody because that would take up the 4.5 seconds that I have to speak, that I was granted time to speak. So I'm not going to do that. But this is my youth part family. And Thank you. Nina Bernstein, in an article about this young boy that was pardoned, described our court as a place where children are prosecuted as adults, but sentenced as candidates for redemption. Yes, that's what we were about. That's what we tried to do, as idealistic, perhaps, as you might think it is. But we were in the process of trying to develop a model that would help us to deal with these young people in an attentive setting that would address not only their needs, but the harm that they did to the community. And that model was a model to mobilize and coordinate the social services that these young people needed. And there's just one story I'm going to tell. It might go 2 or 3 minutes over my allotted time, but you can't tell a judge, even a former judge, how much time he can speak. But I tried to explain what I tried to do in the youth part, and this will be the last story. Then I'll get to the serious business about why I'm here. But I don't know if how many of you saw the movie A Bronx Tale, but that was a wonderful movie, and it uncannily mimicked my own teenage life growing up in Little Italy. I had friends as a teenager on the right and wrong side of the street, as did C. And when I went around to speak about these young people that came before me, because we had the responsibility of sentencing thousands of New York City teenagers. And I learned as much as I could about each of them. I tried to understand their stories. I tried to tell their stories wherever I went. And once I think I'm looking at Jennifer March from Citizens Committee for Children, and I remember speaking in front of the Citizens Committee and trying to explain who these young people were and what we were trying to do with them. And at the very end, I got a letter from one of the people who were in the audience, and it said, Judge Corriero, thank you for helping us to better understand our hardest to love children. I said, wow. Yes, that's what I'm up against. That's the challenge that we had, to try and explain who these young people were that were accused of these most serious crimes in New York. So I tried to explain what I tried to do. And I used the Bronx Tale as a way of doing it. Because those of you who saw the movie, remember there was a scene in the Bronx Tale when this young boy, C, 16 years old, is walking in the streets of his neighborhood with his swagger, as I was trying to do in the tape that you saw me, but I'm getting too old for it. And he's walking in the neighborhood when a car packed full of his friends pulls up to the curb. Hey, C, come on, get in the car. He squeezes into the car, sits in the back seat between two friends, looks at the bottom of the car, at the floor of the car, and he sees a box of Molotov cocktails. His friend in the front seat brandishes a gun. And he realizes that they are on their way to an adjoining neighborhood to settle a score. And we hear C talking to himself in the movie. I don't want to be here. I don't want to do this. This is wrong. But he knows he can't tell his friends, hey, guys, stop the car. Let me out. I don't want any part of this. Why? Because he feels he'll lose face. He'll lose their respect. He'll lose friendship. And just then, when all seems lost for C, the car is cut off by the other protagonist in the movie, Sonny, a local wise guy who took a paternal interest in C, and Sonny reaches into the car and pulls C out of the car. And his friends drive on to tragedy. I won't spoil the movie for you. But I like to think that what we tried to do in the youth part was to metaphorically reach into that car, to pull the kids like C out of the car, who because of their immaturity, their lack of self-image, didn't have the strength to say, stop, I don't want any part of this. Now, the prosecutors thought there were less of those kids in the car than I did. Defense attorneys thought there were more of them in the car than I did. And the social workers wanted everybody out of the car. And I had to strike the balance. And how do you do that? How do you judge the culpability of a 14 or a 15-year-old child? I don't know about you, but I feel very fortunate. If you had seen me, and obviously you did, you saw some of the photographs of me at 16 and 17. If you had seen me at 16 and said, you would never have imagined that this kid would grow up to be a judge. If anything, he's going to be standing before a judge. And yet, somehow, the message got through to me. The message of the power of education. And so I tried to find answers for their behavior in such a way that I could explain it to people who didn't have to do the things that I had to do. I had the responsibility of sentencing 13-year-olds to life imprisonment for murder. Oh, I don't know why I'm telling you that, but it's so, to me, it was so important that I had this moral responsibility that I was sharing with my law clerks, with my court officers, with my court clerks, to get them to think of these children as I thought of them, to try and find those that had that potential that we could work with. And so, the serious matter that I want to talk to you about, and why I'm so grateful to the Center for Family Representation for this award, is that we have made a lot of progress in the last several years with respect to changing the lens by which young people are treated and judged in the courts. We've made tremendous progress. In 2018, the Raise the Age legislation was passed, and it became a complete turning point to how we viewed and treated young people. But the Raise the Age legislation was a compromise. It is not perfect. But what it does do is gives prosecutors, judges, lawyers an opportunity to do the right thing. And I need to acknowledge a few people who were really responsible and are responsible for implementing that Raise the Age legislation and have made significant difference in the way children are treated today than they were 5 years ago. We start with Joe Lentol, who's sitting at our table. Joe Lentol was chair of the Assembly Codes Committee, and he shepherded this bill through the legislature. And he reminds me that I first talked to him about raising the age in 2005. He said, yeah, you came. He told me it was a slam dunk. It took me 12 years to get us to even get it on the legislature. That's true. But without him, it would never have been shepherded through. And seated at the same table is Judge Richardson Mendelson, who's now in charge of implementing the Raise the Age legislation in the courts. And seated next to her is a young lawyer who Article 78 me. Who knows what an Article 78 proceeding is, right? It's a challenge to the judge's rationality, ultimately, and say, this judge is crazy. And we have to go to the appellate court to reverse him. And that was my good friend, my good friend Nancy Ginsburg, who's now responsible for the humane treatment of the young offenders in this city. And we owe them a debt of gratitude for what they did to show and demonstrate that Raise the Age, as imperfect as it may be to some, gives us an opportunity to do the right thing. But it's not over. It's not finished. The stories still have to be told. We have to win the hearts and minds of the public, the people in whose interests we have been fighting the good fight. And there are challenges ahead of us with respect to maintaining what I consider to be a very important story that is yet to be told. And that story has two aspects. The first is that we have to continue to fight to treat children in a developmentally sensitive way and a humane way. And the second aspect of that is with respect to the juvenile justice system. If we fix the family court, we fix the criminal court. The stronger the family court, the more effective the criminal court will be. These two courts have to work in tandem in order to reach the goal that we want to see happen with respect to young people, so that every person who comes into contact with the court has an opportunity to be looked at as a child of value and has an opportunity, same opportunity I had when my parents thought the worst in terms of what I was going to become. This young boy that was pardoned by the governor used to hang out in Chinatown in arcades. Well, I used to, and Nina Bernstein, who wrote this article, Judge Keeps His Word to Immigrant Who Kept His, made parallels between this young boy and me. And she said, well, he hung out in video arcades, and you, Judge Corriero, hung out in a candy store by day and after-hour clubs by night. Yes, I did. I was very fortunate, though, that I was always good I was on the track team, so I always managed to get away. I'm looking at my first partner, Mark Herman, my wonderful first partner. He knows all those stories. Anyway, thank you so much for this award. I'm coming back to New York. I'm going to tell the story of the partnership and the relationship between the family court and the criminal court, and we are going to make it better. We are going to make it happen. Thank you. Thank you.